Oh, good evening. Just taking it all in. Irish Mike, alcoholic. So that you can judge me properly, my sobriety date is October 21st, 1986. I have a sponsor who knows he's my sponsor. He's got 53 years of active service in AA. He doesn't tell me what to do, he shows me what to do. Joe mentioned my home group, No Old Ideas. We read it in chapter 5, we got to let go of our old ideas. The result was nil unless we let go absolutely, right? That meeting is it's a men's meeting, about 175 to 200 people, and we are on fire for recovery. We are on fire for service, and we're on fire for spirituality and God. All I can tell you is there's just energy in that room, and I know it's God. Before I go any further, I wanted to tell a little story to kind of set the tone for tonight. In early recovery, I heard the best definition of an alcoholic I've ever heard. There was a single father. He had about 15 years of sobriety, and he would bring his young son to meetings. The kid was no more than 5 or 6. Kid grew up in AA. So at the break, I'm getting a cup of coffee, and I look down, and there's this little guy eating cookies. And I looked down and I said, "Hey, you know what's going on here?" He says, "Yeah, this is Alcoholics Anonymous." I said, "Okay, what's an alcoholic?" And this little kid says, "An alcoholic is somebody who laughs and smiles a lot and doesn't drink alcohol." So if it's okay with you guys, let's laugh and smile a lot and not drink alcohol. It's Saturday night, so let's have some fun. And we will. Before I forget, I got to thank the committee, Angel and Congo Joe, for asking me. With a nickname like Congo Joe, I was kind of expecting some whacked out Apocalypse Now, middle of the jungle, crazy Colonel Kurtz character. And he's the nicest guy ever, right? Whoever you were when you earned that nickname, you're not that guy anymore, right? And I love the transformations that we make in AA. We're just not the same people that slithered into the doors of AA, right? If we don't change, our sobriety date will. Recovery's a lot like a parking meter, requires a lot of change. We had a couple newcomers, Larry and Ryan, and then some other newer people. My heart goes out to you. It's rough out there. People are dying left and right. They're literally putting fentanyl in everything, and fentanyl is 50 times more powerful than heroin. I was at Starbucks this morning getting a cup of coffee for my wife at 6 in the morning, and I'm talking to the barista, and he said, "Why are you here?" And I said, I'm at an AA convention. He goes, "Oh, I'm so glad you guys are around. I lost a friend in high school. He was smoking a joint and he overdosed on fentanyl. They put fentanyl in the marijuana." So it's wild out there. I sponsor a lot of young men, and they would tell me when they were out there using and a friend would overdose, they would track down the dealer. Now, I'm thinking, track down the dealer to beat the hell out of the guy, right, for killing your friend. No, track down the dealer to get the good stuff. I looked at him, I said, "You know how insane that sounds, right?" And he goes, No, it's okay. I would wear the Narcan around my neck like a necklace. I said, "Dude, that's even more insane. You were literally planning on overdosing, right?" One guy said that he overdosed so many times his drug of choice became Narcan. It's wild out there, man. It's wild. So I got to thank my lovely wife, my beautiful wife, for coming up on the trip. She's in that other 12-step program, the one, on and on and on and on. I married Mrs. Wright. I just didn't know her first name was Always. Okay, I got a question. If a man speaks in the woods and his wife isn't there to hear him, is he still wrong? There's only 2 ways to argue with a woman. Neither one works, right? I better cut with the wife jokes because if I want breakfast in bed anytime soon, I'm going to have to sleep in the kitchen. And she's the next speaker. Oh, and she's going to get me back. As she puts it, I give her a lot of material, which I do. But in all honesty, we have had an amazing life together and an amazing relationship. You know, our family runs on love, laughter, and strong coffee. And, you know, we get silly and we laugh. That's a big part of our relationship. And I'm sure that you're going to hear a little bit about that. But the last couple of years have just been over the top, quite honestly, and I feel so blessed. About a year and a half ago, we took a bucket list trip to Europe. We spent 19 days in Greece, Italy, Spain, and Portugal. Maybe she's going to talk about that little event in Spain. I'll just mention the thing in Spain. So we were in Spain, a little coastal town called Malaga. And there was this beautiful cathedral, a stunning architecture, you know, the tallest building in the area, right? A little courtyard and a fountain. And I said, honey, we're going to have dinner here tonight. Let's go to have dinner here. I had a plan. So we come back, sunset, dinner, and as we're winding down, the sun's setting, I said, honey, you know what today is? And she goes, no. I said, today's the 40th anniversary of our first kiss. And I read renewed vows. So we both got emotional, you know, but I've learned to appreciate tears of love and tears of joy, you know, and that was just an amazing moment. Last July, we went to Vancouver for the AA International, and that rolled right into a sober cruise to Alaska. Sober cruise, it was kind of cool. We would start our day with a big meeting in the main theater of the ship. And then you're interacting with program people throughout the day. It was definitely a fun, safe way to vacation. And the International is something that I think that everyone should experience at least once. You just have to go there I can't really describe it, but it's just an amazing experience. I'm proud of my wife. She's the delegate for Southern California, and they asked her to speak. And the topic they gave her was intimacy. And I said, honey, do you want me to go there to support you? And she goes, oh, absolutely not. You make me nervous. I said, okay, I don't want to make you nervous. I'll sit this one out. I did hear, though, that she mentioned that we like to role play. And her favorite is the sexy librarian. That's where I sit there quietly while she reads a book. Oh, my word. But, you know, I'll tell you, a couple months ago, October 12th was one of the best days of our life. Teresa and I, my wife and I, we got to walk our daughter down the aisle. And then hugged my daughter, told her I loved her, and took my position up front to officiate the wedding. And I've officiated before, but that was a whole other level of emotion. And that was a great honor, but honestly, that wasn't the best part. The best part came later on in the reception, and people are dancing and laughing and having a good time, and I just took a step back. And I'm watching my daughter and my wife, and they're so happy. And I got to say those 4 healing words. I almost missed this. So we've had an incredible journey together. You know, I've allowed myself to fall in love with my wife all over again. You know, I fell in love with my girlfriend, then I fell in love with my fiance, and I fell in love with my wife. And I fell in love with the mother of my children. And that's a deeper love than I've ever felt before. And now I get to fall in love with my best friend, the woman that I'm going to spend the last third of my life in retirement with. So I got to get going on this thing. You know, when I was thinking about what I was going to say tonight, or what I wanted to talk about tonight, my heart kept landing on spiritual experiences for a number of reasons. You know, one, Joe says he likes spiritual experiences, you know, and he's like 6'4", and like, you know, so I better, yeah. And partly because I try to live my life on spiritual principles, you know, live in gratitude, live in hope, live in acceptance, live in faith, and I try to align my will with God. Another reason is not too long ago I watched this documentary. It was called Conscious Contact. It was about Bill and Lois and Stepping Stone. That's where they lived the last 30 plus years of their life. And in that documentary, a gentleman went to Bill and was concerned that he would not have that white light experience like Bill had that fateful day in Towns Hospital when the room filled with white light and Bill was touched by the hand of God. And it was the spiritual beginning of all of this. Really, honestly, that was the spiritual beginning of everything, right, that we have here today. And Bill's response to that man is that his white light experience was about 6 minutes. If you condense your life down to 6 minutes, that's a white light experience. You see, so if you condense your life down to 6 minutes, we've all had that white light experience. But certainly we all had at least one spiritual experience, and that's when we walked into the doors of AA. Raised our hand and said, I'm an alcoholic, right? But the main reason I wanted to talk about it is a couple months ago, one of my sponsees was involved in an accident. He died, crossed over, and had a near-death experience. Now, prior to that accident, his life was a mess. He was going through a divorce, his business it went under, and he was starting a new business. We had all the stresses of that. He was anything but peaceful. He was all over the place. So he dies, he crosses over, he has the near-death experience. He said that he knew immediately that he was in the presence of God. He felt total euphoria, total love, and a peace that he'd never felt before. And he described what he described to me, and I talked to him the day after. He said there were translucent, smooth, white mountains, a white that he'd never seen before, a bright white. He said it was as if I could see white for the first time. And this had been a couple of months, and I can tell you that he brought that peace back with him. I can see it in his eyes, I can hear it in his voice, I can see it in his actions. And he's the third person in my life that's had a near-death experience. I've had another grand sponsee that had one, and then another sponsee that had a near-death experience. And they're all very similar, and they all bring back something when they cross over. So I'm a deeply spiritual person. You know, I honestly believe that we are all God's children. We're spiritually connected to this thing. I really honestly believe that, you know, and no one can convince me otherwise. You know, everything I've read, everything I've experienced, everything I've seen tells me that. The first spiritual experience I want to talk about, I'm going to put in the category of as I was killing myself and planning my death, God was keeping me alive and planning my life. And also those three magic words. So when I finally bottomed out at 25, I was blacking out for like 2-3 days at a time. Now, I'd been blacking out since the age of 15, but losing entire days was very unsettling, very alarming. I mean, it's just like, wow, what happened? What did I do? You know, I almost think that God created blackouts for us so that we didn't have to suffer so much pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization. And I'm so glad that I don't have to ask those 3 blackout questions. You know, the ones when you come out of a blackout, who the hell are you? Where the hell am I? And who pissed in my pants? You know, the DTs were kicking in. You know, I had to do that slow walk of shame down to the liquor store, you know, get that generic vodka, you know, the Old English 840s, right, just to balance out. You know, I worked at a liquor store for a lot of years, and when people would come in first thing in the morning, and they would get their Ripple and their Mad Dog and their generic vodka, I would mock them in my head. I said, I'll never be that bad. That'll never be me. Well, that was me. I lost the power of choice. We lose the power of choice, right? We start out as alcohol connoisseurs and we become alcohol kind of sewers, right? You know what I mean? Financially, I was worse than broke. I was heavily in debt. I had lost my apartment. I was doing some urban camping and some couch surfing. I was so saturated with alcohol, I was suffering from alcohol poisoning. My liver was starting to shut down. And you know, your body has to process alcohol some way. A lot of people would throw up. I would sweat alcohol. And I would pass out on somebody's couch and I would sweat a handle of vodka on their couch. I was the couch killer. I had to make some couch amends. I really did. Mentally, I was losing it for sure. You know, alcohol psychosis is real. It's legit. You know, I was hearing things and seeing things that I knew weren't real. And I knew I was losing it when I was talking back to those voices that I knew weren't real, right? I was 3 gallons of crazy in a 2-gallon bucket, and it was exhausting cleaning up the mess, right? You know, I was on that crazy train I was on the bullet train to Crazy Town, and I had no idea how to get off. You know, all of us get that one-way ticket to the lunatic ball, right? You know, we've all been there. And I love what our book talks about, you know, in full flight from reality. can't differentiate the true from the false, outright mental defectives, right? Check, check, check. But for you newcomers and the new people here, the good news is light shines through those people that are cracked. For me, the worst was the emotional bottom that I had hit. The nonstop self-loathing voices in my head turned into suicidal thoughts. I couldn't stop drinking and I couldn't keep living the way I was living. To me, the only answer was to check out. And I became obsessed with suicide. And then I had the first of many spiritual experiences. As I was planning my death, as I was killing myself planning my death, God was keeping me alive planning my life, honestly. So I was at a friend's house drinking all day long, and alcohol stopped working, right? I couldn't shut off those emotions, the sadness, the despair, right? The self-pity. I couldn't shut that down anymore. It just didn't work anymore. And I was in a super, super dark place, and I took the phone into the bathroom with a long extension cord. It was pre-cell phone days, you guys. And I went into the bathroom, tears streaming down my face. I called this woman that I'd been dating for some time, and she'd actually been going to Al-Anon for 4 months. I figured I owed it to her to say goodbye, to let her know. And I had intended on saying, look, I can't take this anymore. I'm checking out. This is goodbye. That's what I wanted to say, or I thought I was going to say, but that's not what I said. What I said were those 3 magic words: I need help. At that time, I didn't know where that was from. I know now. And I can tell you the next day she picked me up. She took me to my first couple of meetings, but she hadn't a program to know that I needed to do this on my own. 7 months and 3 weeks later, I married that woman. I would not recommend that. What the hell were we thinking? I can tell you, I'm standing in my tux waiting for her to come down the aisle in her wedding dress. She turns the corner. My first thought was, wow, she looks really pretty in that dress. My second thought was, I give this 2 years tops. I was already divorced in my head before we were even married. I didn't know if I could stay sober. I didn't know if I could do a healthy relationship. Relationships, your first year of sobriety is like pouring Miracle-Gro in those character defects, right? You're going to love this. You know what relationship is? The relationship acronym, RELATIONSHIP. Really exciting love affair turns into outrageous nightmare. Sobriety hangs in peril. They're going to have a new reality show on dating the first year of sobriety. You know what they're going to call it? World's Deadliest Catch. But here's the miracle of it. We are still together today. She had a strong Al-Anon program. I had a strong AA program. We grew in parallel tracks. We made God and our program the highest priority in our life. We didn't make each other higher powers. And we were able to raise a couple of children in a very loving 12-step home. And I love her more now than ever before. I guess I can sum it up like this. I've had a choice of loving you or breathing. I'd use my last breath to say I love you. And when I die, I hope it's in your arms. All right, enough of that mushy stuff. Let's get back to the good stuff. Me being a pathetic newcomer. So I did the shake and the bake. People got it easy now. We could detox, month of rehab, 6 months of sober living. No, I did the shake and bake in the room. So I'm shaking and I'm sweating. I'm terrible being insecure, so I can't talk to anyone. My teeth are messed up from neglect, so I don't want to open my mouth or smile. 7th tradition comes around. I'm all self-conscious because I can't put $1 in the basket. I'm wearing 70s clothes in 1986. I look like a cross between Beetlejuice and Willy Wonka. I was not a vision for you, right? There was a gentleman, and he reached over and he says, welcome, you look like you're new. And, with all sincerity, I look back and go, how'd you know? And you know what the guy started doing? He started laughing. I started laughing. So began the healing through laughter. Laughter is the sound of recovery. Laughter is the healing music of this program. And you guys have been playing 39 years of beautiful music for me. Our book talks about it on page 132. We're not a glum lot. Then it goes on to say, we absolutely insist on enjoying life. And then further down the page it says, outsiders are shocked at the merriment we find in our tragic experiences. So I have this grand sponsee. He lived in a tent in Georgia for 5 years, smoking meth and crack and drinking himself into oblivion, talking to tree people. And he tried to commit suicide 21 times. The overdose never worked. The gun jammed 6 times. He tried to hang himself. The tree limb broke. He stole a car, drove it into a lake. It floated. He took 2 bottles of Benadryl, passed out in a patch of poison ivy. The Benadryl saved his life. Outsiders are shocked at the merriment we find in our tragic experiences. You know, God is the greatest comedian that ever existed, that most of the audience is just too afraid to laugh. Not in here. We laugh at everything, right? So the next spiritual experience I want to talk about, I'm going to put it in the category of sponsor blackmail. And got them in a broken heart, but you got to give them all the pieces. So back in LA where I got sober, what you do when you have a birthday is you have somebody hold the cake while you blow out the candle. A lot of times that's your sponsor. So I'm coming up on a year sobriety. I'm talking to my sponsor, and he says, Mike, did you make that amends to your ex, Gene? I said, no, Matt, no. That's a no. I'm never doing it. Too painful. That's on my never list. And it's staying on my never list. Now, Gene was this woman that I dated from the age of 16 to 22. She was my first love. We had lived together for 4 years. She was there for a lot of my drinking, so I definitely owed her some amends. Towards the end of our relationship, I caught her cheating a bunch of times, and we tried to make it work, but the trust was gone, and we broke up, and it broke me. I fell apart. I didn't want to feel those feelings. I wanted to numb out. You know, men are like mascara. We run at the first sign of emotion, right? So from the age of 22 to 23 was a blur. It was just one long blackout. And but that's when the consequences hit. You know, it's fun with consequences, and it's all consequences. And I'm hitting the almost all consequences stage of my story there. And but you know, yeah, the arrest, the crashing cars, coming to an emergency rooms. But you know, as I look back, God was there for me, right? God's been there for us, He's been there in us, and God works through us. We're all here, we're all alive, we all should be dead, so God has definitely been there for us. If you've gone through the steps, then you know that God is in you. And if you're working with others, you know God is working through you, right? So the arrest, they dropped all the charges or they lost the evidence. Crashed a bunch of cars, but I didn't kill anybody. I did kill a friend's Porsche. Coming to an emergency rooms, you know, I came out of a blackout and the emergency doctor's over me and he says, you shouldn't be here. You're lucky to be alive. You keep doing this, you will die. 2 hours after being released from the hospital, I'm chugging a fifth of Jack. I just wasn't ready. I started going to meetings at 23, but I went in with the world's worst attitude, looking for the differences, not the similarities. And so I didn't relate to anything, right? And then I had reservations about God. You said God, I heard Catholicism. You said spirituality, I heard Catholicism. You see, I was born and raised Catholic, went to Catholic school, was an altar boy. I could say Mass by heart, but I could never go that longest mile between my mind and my heart. And to me, you know, God was keeping score. He was going to punish me for my sins, and I was going to hell by the time I was 12, so why bother? What I realized when I got into the program later on, 2 years later, was that I had a child's perception of God. I learned about God when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, and a child's perception of anything is fear-based. So I had a fear-based perception of God. What I needed was an adult perception of God, a God of my understanding. My wife's giving me some hand signals. I have no idea what she's saying. Where was I? Child's perception of God. Yeah, so the God I believe in now is all loving and all forgiving. So different than the God that I grew up with, right? And in my journey, I didn't get there immediately, but I got there eventually. And I can tell you, it can be summed up. There's a 3-line poem from William Blake. It says, I sought my soul I could not see. I sought my God, but God eluded me. I sought my brother, and I found all three. Isn't that us? I'm pretty sure that guy was in AA. I don't know, maybe, I don't know. The other part is I had reservations about the nature of the disease, the allergy, body, obsession, mind, spiritual malady. I got obsession to the mind. I was completely obsessed with alcohol, but I didn't get any spiritual connection how I could stay sober or how spirituality would connect to my day-to-day living. I just didn't have that connection at that time. But the thing that scared me the most was the allergy of the body. What I heard at that time was you can't drink forever. And it's funny, my disease, the disease that wanted to kill me, filtered out the most important part of that. The most important part of that is one day at a time. I just don't have to drink right now. So I had to go out and destroy the rest of my life, burn everything to the ground. And sometimes God has to turn up the volume of your life in order for us to hear the message. That's my story. So I'm on the phone with my sponsor. I said, no, man, I'm not going to make that amends. It's just too painful. And he says, well, if you don't make that amends, I'm not going to give you a cake on your birthday. Don't you love sponsor blackmail? So my response was, F you, I guess you're not going to give me a cake on my birthday. But I thought about it, I love this man. This man saved my life. He took me through the steps, methodically, without gaps, one after another. We went through all 12 steps in about 90 days. And I'm so grateful to that man that he did not delay my happiness. Don't delay your happiness. He took me through the book, line by line, in a book study in his living room. And to this very day, I still do that with others. My wife keeps on giving me signals, and she's like blowing my mind. I don't know what to think what she's saying or doing. I don't know. He also got me involved in service. I had a commitment at all the meetings that I went to, and the thing that he got me really involved in was hospitals and institutions, H&I. And I had a couple pounds a month for a solid decade, and a lot of them were at indigent detoxes like Salvation Army and LA Skid Row and the drug ward at County General. That was an amazing panel. I called them the yellow people. We went into the drunk ward and their livers were shut down. Yellow eyes, yellow skin, hooked up to all kinds of IVs. They were just waiting there to die. There was no hope. But we went old school AA, just like Bill and Bob did for AA number 3, Bill Dotson, and went bedside just talking to these guys. What an amazing experience. So I sucked it up. I called my ex. We met down at Venice Beach. There was no agenda. I was married. She was married. She even had a small baby with her. And I told her I was a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was coming up on a year of sobriety. She was blown away that I was sober. So was I. She asked me how I got sober, and I said, a lot of credit goes to Teresa. She started going to Al-Anon. I love Al-Anon. Al-Anon saved my life. And then she said something that kind of threw me. She said, you mean there was something I could have done? And once again, it affirmed in me that I had hurt somebody deeply by my drinking. So I made my amends, didn't get into anything that she had done. I just stayed on my side of the street. I'm walking off the beach and I'm walking on clouds. You see, I'd been haunted and crushed by a lot of emotions that I didn't know how to process. She was my first love, so very, very deep down within me, I still had feelings for her. But mostly I was filled with a lot of resentment, anger, and hate. And that's a kaleidoscope of emotions that I didn't know how to process. And I certainly didn't want to face. But as I'm walking off that beach, I was free. I was free. And then something very unexpected happened to me. I fell more in love with my wife. You see, I realized that I had built a wall around my heart to protect me from getting hurt. but that wall also kept me from completely loving another. God will mend a broken heart, but you got to give him all the pieces. And for me, that was making that amends that I absolutely did not want to make. The next spiritual experience I want to talk about, I'm going to put in the category of I could finally forgive myself. And life comes full circle. So this story has to begin when I crossed that invisible line. When I was 14, I was drinking some beers with some friends, picked up the phone, called her. Her was this girl I had this serious crush on, asked her out. She said yes. That's when I saw the bells. That's when I heard the bells and the whistles, right? I'd been drinking pretty consistently since 12, but that was it, man. That was the rainbows and the unicorns, you know? Liquid courage, you know, social lubricant, the missing ingredient in life. And yeah, that was it for me. You know, it's like, it's ironic though, you know, alcohol gave me wings to fly, but then it took away the sky. You know, we all get to that place where we cross that invisible line where we realize that we're walking around life 3 drinks shy of comfortable. That was my moment. You know, I was only 14. When I was 15, I started working at a liquor store. Everybody that worked there were alcoholics. We drank our entire shift. Not a great place to work for a 15-year-old alcoholic. I can tell you that half the guys in there were dealers, including the owner of the store, so I had access to other produce and dried goods at wholesale prices. This is an AA meeting, but I will tell you I did cocaine and Quaaludes once for 10 years. Those little white lies always turned into little white lines. You know, I'm going to go on the record and say I hated cocaine, I just liked the way it smelled, okay? Yeah. Cocaine has got to be the most insidious drug on the planet. If you do too much of it, it makes you horny beyond belief, and then it won't let you do anything about it. You get chronic sleepy pee-pee. my sponsor says, that's assault with a dead weapon. Like playing pool with a rope, right? Took me all night to do what I used to do all night. Help me, Joe. I'm stuck in a limp willy joke and I can't get out. All right. Let me get back to my first love, you know, my first true love, my mistress, alcohol. So when I was 18, they made me night manager, gave me the keys to the store, and it was on. Run out of alcohol at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, no problem. Go down to the store, stock up, kept that party going. By the time I was 19, I already knew I was an alcoholic. Guys I hung out with, we all knew we were alcoholics, and we joked about it. Better a frontal lobotomy than a bottle in front of me. You know, drink triple, C double, act single. You know, we had nicknames like Grass and Zigzag, and mine was FedEx, because if I went to party at your house, I would absolutely positively be there overnight. You know, but we rationalized our drinking. We were all living on our own, paying our own bills, not necessarily legally. We all had girlfriends. We were all in school. We were all athletes. Rationalization, justification, masturbation. 3 ways to screw yourself, right? You know what rationalize, minimalize, and intellectualize have in common? They all end in lies. I can tell you all 4 of those guys are dead. 3 from the disease, 1 from cancer after a life of hard drinking. I know that didn't help his cancer. 2 of those guys were like super close friends, like best friends, right? 1 guy I even grew up with. And in and out of the program, 25 years, jail's institution, that final price. I got to see how bad my life would have been had I not stopped drinking, because I was with them. I was with them every step of the way. You know, it's interesting. Another spiritual experience just popped in my head, and I've learned that when that happens, there's a reason, and that reason is usually sitting in one of these chairs. So this one guy, Bob, that I grew up with, we went to school together, we were on a bunch of teams together, we drank and partied together, we got sober together. I was the godfather of his daughter. He just couldn't get it. You know, he would get 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, he even had 2 years at one point, but he couldn't stay sober. He just could never shake the demons of a very abusive childhood. And I always felt guilty that I could not get him to stay sober. And I know that's misguided, but that was the way I felt. I felt extreme guilt that my best friend could not stay sober, in spite of everything that I tried. He died homeless. He was 50, early 50s. He died homeless, literally in the gutter. He had crawled into a storm drain. It was back in Maryland, middle of wintertime, crawled into a storm drain. They found him dead next to an empty bottle of Scope. He had aspirated and died. He'd been homeless for a couple of years. They had the memorial back in Maryland, but his wife wanted to sprinkle his ashes in at Venice Beach, where we grew up. And she called me and said, "Hey, can you set up a memorial for us?" And I did, and so they came out, and I got to spend the day with his wife and his 13-year-old daughter, my goddaughter, Winter, and their adopted daughter, and got to walk around Venice, and I got to show where we grew up, and where we were getting a lot of mischief and play basketball at our surf spots. And growing up in Venice was fun. It was an adventure, man. It was a lot of fun until it wasn't, right? Let me paint the picture. Okay, in 1974, we're 13 years old. Venice Beach became a nude beach. Now try being a 13-year-old boy going through puberty at a nude beach. That summer I got really good at pitching tents, let's just put it that way. But mostly when I was walking and talking to them and telling them, mostly I just told them what an amazing person that Bob was, and they knew that. He was the most kind and loving person that I've ever met. He would literally give his shirt off his back. He would. Everybody loved Bob except for Bob. He was also quite the ladies' man. He was 6'2", blonde hair, blue-eyed, and ripped. Women were just drawn to him. When we were in 11th grade, he dated the girl that was voted prettiest girl in the school. As a senior, he dated the girl that was voted prettiest in the school. We would have cheerleaders show up at our swim meets. The other guys on the other teams going, "What kind of voodoo mojo is this?" Right? Because cheerleaders only went to basketball games and football games. But at Venice High, they went to swim meets to see Bob in Speedos. So we're on the pier, the Venice Pier, the sun's setting, and the wind's picking up and starting to get a little cold. And Winter, his daughter, 13-year-old daughter, starts to read a letter, and she makes it to about 10 minutes, and she starts to break down crying. She hands it over to her sister. Her sister starts reading it. Sister starts to cry. But she makes it through the letter. By that time, we're all in tears. There was about 30 of us on the pier, and half of the people talked. And everybody mentioned what an incredible person he was, right? And kind and loving, but also how loyal. He was one of the most loyal friends that I've ever had. And I can tell you, this is the weird part. So this whole time, there was a single dolphin swimming around down below us. And if you know anything about a dolphin, they swim in pods. They don't go individual. But there's also certain species of dolphins that they're super loyal. When they lose a mate, they never couple up again. They leave the pod and they live a life of isolation and loneliness. That's Bob's spirit animal right there. He was a surfer, he was a competitive swimmer, and the loneliness. The last 2 years of his life were very, very lonely. So we're going to give it another go.
I'm also hoping maybe if you stay down here, it won't make that noise.
All right.
So let's try it.
Okay. The microphone got more of an applause than I. Yay! Oh my word. The dolphin thing was wild. Everyone noticed it. It was just like, what is that? But I kind of knew. I just knew that Bob was there. And his wife gave us all an opportunity to grab a handful of Bob's ashes that we could say our own personal goodbyes. And I'm standing there at the edge of the pier with my hand in the ashes, and the tears are just streaming down my face. But I couldn't open my hand. I couldn't open it. And then I felt that rush of warmth shoot through me, and I heard that whisper, "You have to let me go. You have to let me go." And at that moment, I felt a shift. All that guilt that I had felt all those years shifted to love of his memory. So if we're hanging on to the past, we can't move it forward in the future. So if there's something in your life that you haven't let go of, know that you're holding yourself back from something very significant, emotionally or spiritually, right? All right, so let me get back to I could finally forgive myself. So I worked at this liquor store for, from 15 to 22, 7 years. I took a lot of things from that store that weren't mine. I definitely drank a lot of things from that store that weren't mine. I owed them amends. There were 3 brothers that owned that store. The 2 that worked there, one died of a cocaine overdose, one died he was actually a heroin addict, he shot himself. So you just imagine, that these are the owners, right? So I went to the surviving owner, and he didn't work there. He was the older brother, and I told him what was going on. He was kind of freaked out by what was going on, and I said, hey, look, I took a lot of things that weren't mine, but I owe you an amends. I said, I only have a part-time job, but I'll send you $100 a month until I make it right. So every month I'd send him $100, but I also sent him a note on my life and recovery. And quite honestly, I think he liked the notes more than he liked the money. He was independently wealthy, but the notes on recovery resonated with him because of his younger brothers, right? Fast forward 5 years, send him $100 and a letter. My daughter Julia was born. She stole my heart. She's perfect. I can't believe that I have anything to do with this beautiful little child. I now know what unconditional love is, right? Gushing like a father gushes, right? So he writes me back a letter, and he says, he absolved me of the debt. And he said, Mike, what you didn't know was my mother's name was Julia. And she died of cancer. And when my daughter was born, I named her Julia. He said, spend the money on your Julia. I held that letter outside my house, and I was sobbing uncontrollably. Just going, what is wrong with you? I'm an adult male, I'm just sobbing. I couldn't stop crying. And I realized what it was. I wasn't having an emotional breakdown, I was having an emotional breakthrough. You see, that was my last amends. I was finally free. I no longer had to carry around that guilt and that shame. I could finally forgive myself. But that story doesn't end there. 15 years later, I'm very successful in my chosen profession. I'm a very high-ranking chief officer in a very large fire department. I'm the keynote speaker at an academy graduation. Full dress uniform. I'm milling around with the families before the graduation, and there's George, the guy that I made the amends to. So I went up to him and reintroduced myself, and he's giving me the up and the down. I didn't look like that tore-up newcomer he met 20 years earlier, that's for sure. He congratulated me on doing so well in life. I said, George, I gotta ask you, why are you here? Why are you here? And he points to the middle of the graduating class, this young woman, he says, that's my Julia. Don't you love when life comes full circle? I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to throw one in. Might push into my wife's time. That's going to cost me. It's Saturday night. What the heck? So I have a little token of spiritual hope for all of you. And they're up here on the table. So come and grab one. But there's a backstory to it. About 6 years ago, I get a call from one of my sponsees, and he says, hey, I'm going to send my best friend down to get sober. Can you help him out? So he comes down, I meet this guy for coffee. The first thing out of his mouth is I know I need to get sober, but I don't believe in God. By the end of coffee, I had him say that he'd be willing to be open-minded to new ideas and perspectives. And I also asked him, do you believe that I believe? He says, fine, I believe you believe. I said, great, that's a start. So this guy starts going to a bunch of meetings. Here's that beautiful language of the heart. He starts hearing God speak through others, right? He sees these life transformations, all these miracles in other people's lives, and he starts to believe a little bit. Then I take him through the steps, and he starts to have his own spiritual experiences, especially in steps 4 and 9. And he was in town for 45 days, and the day before he was going to go home, we were at a meeting, and all he's talking about is God. And I just sat back and smiled. I had done my job as a sponsor. I took him through the steps to help him find his own personal spiritual awakening. A couple months later, I agreed to do the 7-hour drive up to Stockton to where he lives to speak at this big speaker meeting that they have where all the groups come together for one meeting, and I love the we part of that. And he's sitting in the front row with his wife and his 18-year-old daughter, Morgan, and his teenage son's out there in the audience someplace too. And whenever I speak at a meeting, I try to mention that I struggled with faith in the beginning, especially this turning your will and your life over to this care of God, this nebulous God that you can't see, hear, or touch. I just couldn't figure that out. So what I did is I started doing tangible things. I made God tangible. I brought him alive. I made him alive. So whenever I would, find change on the ground, I'd pick it up and I'd thank God for my sobriety and everything that I have today. And if you do this, you're going to find change at the strangest places at just the right time, right? I strap in the passenger seat for my higher power. When I walk into a room, I close my eyes and I say, after you. And when I get in, I picture an open chair, God's chair. By the way, if you notice, there's a chair up, and then I put that up there. Whenever I speak, I make sure God's got my back. The one that I liked the most was I would cup my hands, and I'd close my eyes, and I'd visualize all of life's stressors into my cupped hands. Money issues, relationship issues, conflicts with people, work issues, health issues, whatever it is, and I would physically give it to God. And that worked. And as through the day, if my self-will would come back, I would do it again, As a matter of fact, my wife and I did it right before we started. By the way, I've been doing this for 39 years, all that stuff. I still do it. I still do this stuff. It works. Why stop, right? So I go home. A couple days later, I get a phone call from Mike, my sponsor. He says, "You're not going to believe this. Morgan, my daughter, was walking down the street the next day, and she looked down, and there was a penny on the ground. And she picked up that penny, and there was a cross in it. And she brought it home, and she showed it to me, and with tears in her eyes, says, 'Dad, I think I want to go to church.'" They were a family of atheists. They've been going to church ever since. And Morgan, his daughter, even has a Bible in her backseat of her car. Now, I'm not promoting any faith over another. I believe there is many paths to God as there are people on this planet. I believe in an all-powerful God. God can be all things to all people. No problem. He's God. Right? The God I believe in is all loving and all forgiving. And I hope the God that you believe in is somebody that you can, or something that you can lean into when you need to. That comforts you like a warm blanket on a cold night. I hope you find that journey and keep open-minded, So the last spiritual experience I want to talk about, oh, by the way, the pennies with the cross, there's a couple hundred up here. Go ahead and take one. A little token of spiritual hope. Again, I'm not promoting any faith or another, it's just a penny. But I can tell you that penny changed the whole family's life. So the next spiritual experience I want to talk about, I'm going to put in the category of God has a sense of humor, and is it odd or is it God? So I was born and raised in Venice, where the debris meets the sea. I was one of 4 illegitimate children. We had 3 different fathers. We all had different color hair. We were quite the genetic cesspool. I looked up my family tree, and there were 2 dogs pissing on it. I grew up in a really bad neighborhood. It was called my family. None of the fathers were involved in our lives, so we were really poor. We were so poor, we went to KFC to lick other people's fingers, right? Also I had red hair and freckles. I was different, and I got picked on. I got bullied a lot until I had a growth spurt and became an athlete and could protect myself. But don't feel too bad for me. I did have about 25 girlfriends in grammar school and junior high. Unfortunately, none of them knew that. If I'm going to be rigorously honest, my first girlfriend was a magazine. But sadly, part of my story is a lot of your stories. I was a victim of a lot of emotional and physical abuse growing up. It was just chaos, and I can tell you, I was really worried about having children, and because they didn't want to pass that on from generation to generation. And I can tell you, we have 2 adult children. They've never been spanked. It stopped. It finally stopped. The cycle stopped with me, right? Because of you guys. So when I had about 2 years sobriety, I finally had enough courage to ask my mom who my dad was. And she said, "You better sit down." And she said, "Your dad was a Catholic priest." Being raised Catholic, I know that wasn't supposed to happen. I was oops. She's looking at me with this mortified look on her face, but I couldn't possibly tell her what I was thinking, because what I was thinking is, Mom, you've been a very naughty girl. Very naughty. It's like it was suddenly in a Mari episode with the DNA results, Father, you are the father. My birth certificate was an apology letter from a condom company. So, snuck that one in. So I called the Catholic Church looking for my dad. Unfortunately, he had passed away 3 months earlier of cancer, so I never got to meet my dad. But they hooked me up with a couple of priests that he had worked with. And the first one worked out at the San Fernando Mission, and I called him up, and he wasn't believing anything that I had to say, but he agreed to meet with me anyway. So I go out to the San Fernando Mission, I walk into his office, his jaw literally dropped, and he said, "You're his son." Well, at least now I know what the dude looked like, right? He told me my dad was born and raised in Ireland, very outgoing, very funny. He played professional rugby before the seminary. He gave inspirational sermons and packed the church. But he was a drunk. A lot of similarities. The next guy, he had a different perspective. He had left the priesthood in his late 50s and had a couple of small children. And we talked for hours, and he's telling me about my dad. I'm telling him about my life. And at the very end, he says, it's too bad your dad didn't get to know you, because if he would have been very proud of you. You see, for a son, that's all you want to hear from your dad is, "I'm proud of you." So I got to close that chapter of my life. So I thought. Fast forward 25 years. We moved from LA to San Clemente. I'm speaking on a Friday night, and I tell that story. A couple days later, at a meeting I've been going to for about 6 months, we sit in the general same area, and I was next to this old Irishman named Charlie. And before the meeting, Charlie leans over and he says, "Mike, I really enjoyed your pitch on Friday. What was your father's name?" And I said, "My father's name." He said, "Oh my God, we grew up together in Ireland." They were best friends. They played professional rugby, and my father helped him immigrate to the United States. Charlie was there in 1947 at that church in South Pasadena when my dad said his first Mass. And they gave this commemorative card. We're at the meeting. Charlie pulls out his wallet, pulls out that card. He says, "I've been saving this for 65 years, but I think it belongs to you." Is it odd or is it God? Right? I mean, how does that happen? Ireland to South Pasadena to LA to San Clemente to Greeley, Colorado. I mean, how does all that come together, right? It's just impossible. He had some pictures of my dad, and he also had that one question: did he ever get sober? He got sober at the end of his life. So I'm already way over time. I have no idea because my timer's up on the podium. But I'm going to end with this, or at least talk about this. We get to define a higher power of our own understanding, but you don't have to stop there. You can define a spiritual experience of your own understanding. And don't set the bar so high. Don't wait for the room to fill with white light or the burning bush, though, if we all condense our life down to 6 minutes, that's a white light experience. Our book talks about it in the spiritual experience appendix in the back. It says, a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism. If you stick around here, you will change. And by definition, you've had a spiritual experience. And then down the page, it talks about spiritual experience of the educational right, where you get bits and pieces of spirituality over time, which is a story for a lot of us, and me too, right? It's those things for sure. What's the 12th step? Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of the steps. I've never met anyone yet that has honestly taken all 12 steps that hasn't had a spiritual awakening. Maybe they exist, not in my life. But to me, it's that and so much more. It's anything that changes my attitude and my perspective in a positive way. It's when I heard a small child describe an alcoholic as somebody who laughs and smiles a lot and doesn't drink alcohol. Or I said those 3 magic words, "I need help." Or I let go of something super painful that was holding me back in life. And I was free. making that last amends, and realizing I could finally forgive myself and I could move on. Finding out the guy next to me has got this incredible link to my heritage. You see, it's a spiritual experience if you allow it to be a spiritual experience, and no one can take that away from you. You get to define it. It's whatever you want in your heart. You know, I no longer believe we're human beings having a spiritual experience. I believe we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And I do this throughout the day so often that life itself has become a spiritual experience. And I try to feel the spiritual interconnectedness of all of us. I know for a fact God is in this room right now with us. It's something I can feel, right? You know, it's hearing, I love you, Mommy, or I love you, Daddy. You know, we're hearing a child's laughter, especially your own. Beautiful sunrise, beautiful sunset. You know, tears of joy or extreme moments of gratitude. It's a spiritual experience if you allow it to be a spiritual experience, right? It's those God shots that feel like, you know, those coincidences that you know, say, okay, is this odd or is it God? You know, to me, it's God. But the one that I love the most is when life is unfolding before me and I can take a step back and say those 4 beautiful, healing words, I almost missed this. I've had an opportunity to say that so many times in the past 39 years. I feel so blessed, right? I have no idea where we are on time, so I'm going to just wrap it up and I'm going to end with this. I opened 2 gifts from God this morning, my eyes. Today, I love life. I love this program. And I love all of you. And just think, I almost missed this. Thank you.